The sound was the first thing. A low, continuous hum, like a single note held by a colossal cello deep within the earth. Her son, Samuel, heard it first, his head tilted while he was sorting his collection of creek-smoothed stones. He was 7, an age where the world was still filled with whispers meant only for him. "Mama," he said, his voice small against the vast quiet of the Montana foothills, "the mountain is singing." Martha, a plus-sized woman whose substance was more muscle and grit than softness, was mending a tear in his trousers. Her light blue prairie dress, worn pale with work and sun, was a soft color against the hard lines of their small cabin. She didn't look up. "That's just the wind in the pines, little bird," but it wasn't windy. The air was still, holding the sharp, resinous scent of juniper and the dusty perfume of late autumn. The German shepherd, Anker, who lay by the hearth, lifted his head, his ears twitching not toward the door, but toward the solid stone of the chimney that formed the cabin's back wall. Samuel persisted, his faith in his senses absolute. "It's not the wind. It's different." Later, as dusk began to purple the sky, Martha stepped outside to latch the chicken coop. The quiet was profound. And in that quiet, she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a vibration, a thrumming that seemed to travel up through the soles of her worn leather boots. It was less a sound and more a feeling, a resonance in her bones. She placed a hand on the granite outcrop that their cabin leaned against, the very same one her husband had chosen for its shelter from the northern gales before the fever took him. The stone was faintly warm, and it vibrated with that same deep, steady hum. She thought of the 2 winters since she'd been alone, of the narrow but constant hardship, the careful rationing of flour and hope. Life was a ledge, and she had learned to walk it without looking down. But some things, a boy's strange observation, a dog's unease, a song in the stone, demanded you stop and listen. It could be nothing, a trick of the cooling air. It could be something. October gave way to a brittle November. The hum was constant, a quiet companion to their days. It was strongest at the back of the cabin, near the massive stone face that served as their northern windbreak. Following the sound with Anker trotting silently beside them, Martha and Samuel traced it away from the house, along the base of the granite escarpment. It led them 50 yards past their woodpile to a place where ancient junipers grew thick and tangled, their gnarled roots gripping the rock like arthritic fingers. Pushing aside the dense, scratchy foliage, Samuel pointed. "There, Mama." It was a crack, a vertical fissure in the rock, no wider than her shoulders at its broadest point and tapering to a hand's width. It was dark within. Most would have dismissed it as just another feature of the weathered mountain, a shallow break in the stone. But the hum was emanating from it, a clear, audible drone, and a faint, cool draft, smelling of deep earth and damp stone, breathed out from the opening. Samuel, thin as a willow switch, could have slipped inside easily, but Martha held him back. She knelt, her sturdy frame making the motion one of deliberate purpose, and peered into the darkness. It was not a shallow crack. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the grey daylight. "Stay here," she told her son, her voice calm and even. She returned to the cabin not for a lantern, but for the heavy iron pry bar and the 8-pound sledgehammer her husband had used to set the foundation stones. For the rest of the day, the quiet of the foothills was broken by the sharp clang of steel on rock. Martha worked with a steady, powerful rhythm, her arms and shoulders, thick with the labor of a solitary life, driving the hammer. She wasn't fighting the mountain, she was persuading it. Chips of granite flew, and slowly, methodically, she widened the opening, her breath misting in the cold air. The work warmed her, a fire lit from the inside out. By late afternoon, the fissure was just wide enough. She took a deep breath, handed the tools to Samuel, and squeezed herself into the gap, the rough stone scraping against the fabric of her dress. The making of a new path was always a tight fit at the beginning. The passage was claustrophobic, the rock pressing close on either side. It was a tight squeeze for her broad shoulders and hips, and she had to turn sideways, shuffling 1 foot at a time, her hands braced against the opposing walls. The stone was cool and surprisingly smooth, worn by millennia of slow geological breathing. The air, which she had expected to be stale and suffocating, was fresh and carried the clean, metallic scent of wet rock and ozone. It was utterly dark, a profound blackness that felt solid, but the low hum was a guide, growing stronger with every shuffling step. Anchor whined softly from the entrance, and Samuel's small voice called out, "Mama? Are you all right?" Her own voice was absorbed by the stone around her. "I'm fine. I'm almost there." The passage was longer than she expected, a straight, unwavering corridor into the heart of the granite. She counted her steps. 38, 39, 40. Just as a flicker of unease began to prickle at the edges of her resolve, she saw it. Not light, precisely, but a change in the quality of the darkness ahead, a shift from absolute black to a deep, velvety grey. A few more steps, and the narrow passage suddenly ended, opening out into a space so vast her breath caught in her throat. She stepped out of the fissure and onto a floor of smooth, solid stone. The hum was all around her now, a gentle, pervasive vibration that seemed to be the voice of the place itself. Above her, the ceiling was lost in impenetrable shadow, but it was not a sealed tomb. High, high above, dozens of tiny, hairline fractures in the rock allowed slivers of the outside world's light to filter down, weaving together into a soft, diffused luminescence that filled the immense chamber with the gentle glow of a perpetual twilight. The scale of it was staggering. It was a cathedral carved by water and time, a hollow world hidden within the solid mountain. It was silent, save for the hum and one other sound, the gentle, rhythmic trickle of water. The space was a rough circle, perhaps 200 feet across, its edges fading into shadow. The air was warm, a steady and inexplicable warmth that felt like a spring day, a stark contrast to the biting November cold she had left behind. From a fissure in the far wall, a steady stream of water, clear as polished air, emerged from the rock, cascading down a series of moss-covered ledges into a wide, shallow pool carved naturally into the stone floor. The pool was perfectly still, its surface reflecting the faint light from above like a dark mirror. The water then vanished into another crack in the floor, its journey a complete mystery. Samuel, who had finally gathered his courage and scurried down the passage after her, stood frozen at her side, his small hand gripping hers tightly. His gaze was wide with a wonder that erased all fear. "It's a secret room," he whispered, his voice filled with reverence. Anchor, who had followed the boy, seemed calm, his usual protective vigilance replaced by a quiet curiosity as he lapped cautiously at the edge of the pool. Martha walked slowly toward the center of the cavern, her heavy work boots making no sound on the smooth stone. She knelt by the pool and dipped her hand in. The water was cool, sweet, and pure. Looking around, she saw life. Patches of pale, luminous moss clung to the walls, casting a faint, ghostly green glow in the darker corners. In a crevice near the water source, a single, delicate fern had taken root, its fronds a vibrant, impossible green in this subterranean world. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a loosening of a knot in her chest she hadn't even realized was there. This place was not a threat. It was a gift. It was shelter. It was possibility. Her mind, always practical, began to work. The constant warmth, the perpetual light, the endless supply of fresh water, it was a hidden homestead, a sanctuary against the harshest winters, the deepest droughts. This hollow in the granite was not an end, but a beginning. The mountain had not just been singing, it had been offering an invitation. Over the next weeks, as winter began to lay its hard, white hand on the world outside, the cavern became their project. The work was slow, measured, and purposeful. Martha used the pry bar to carefully widen the entrance passage just enough that she could walk through without turning sideways, her movements sure and economical. She did not blast or break, but chipped and levered, respecting the integrity of the stone. Each morning, she would haul buckets of rich, dark soil from her fallow vegetable patch into the cavern, a back-aching, repetitive labor. She chose a spot directly under the largest confluence of light-bearing fissures and built a low, circular wall of flat stones, creating a contained garden bed nearly 10 feet across. There, in the earth she had carried from the sunlit world, she planted seeds she'd been saving, hardy lettuce, spinach, and kale, crops that could tolerate the lower light. She worked on the water source next, using more flat stones and a clever arrangement of smaller rocks to create a channel, directing a small, secondary trickle away from the main pool to a spot she designated as her work area. Here, she began constructing a dry sink and a preparation surface. From the collapsed remains of an old shed her husband had built, she salvaged weathered but sturdy planks of pine. She hauled them, one by one, through the passage and began to build. With a simple hand drill and wooden pegs, she constructed a set of long, deep shelves against a smooth, dry section of the cavern wall, a place for storage, for curing, for keeping things safe from the frost and the mice that plagued their cabin's larder. The process was a meditation. The rasp of the saw, the tap of the hammer, the scrape of stone on stone, these sounds joined the constant hum of the cavern, becoming part of its song. They spent the long evenings there, the faint light from above enough to see by. While Martha worked, Samuel would explore the edges of the great room, his pockets filling with unusually shaped stones and bits of sparkling crystal he found embedded in the rock. He arranged them carefully on the lowest shelf, a growing museum of their new world. Anchor would lie between them, a silent, watchful guardian, his presence a warm, living anchor in the heart of the ancient stone. By January, the world outside was locked in ice and snow. The wind howled around the corners of the cabin, and the temperature rarely rose above freezing. But inside the cavern, it was always temperate, always calm. And in the garden bed Martha had built, a miracle was unfolding. The spinach and kale had not only sprouted but were thriving, their leaves a deep, healthy green, lush and tender. She harvested the outer leaves, leaving the plants to continue growing, and their salads were a taste of summer in the dead of winter. The cavern's unique properties became more apparent with each passing week. A side of bacon hung from a peg drilled into the stone wall cured perfectly, without a hint of mold. The potatoes and onions stored on her hand-built shelves remained as firm and fresh as the day they were harvested, untouched by the rot or sprouting that inevitably claimed a portion of her winter stores in the cabin's root cellar. The constant, gentle warmth seemed to preserve everything. It was a perfect larder. Seeing the truth of it, Martha grew bolder. In a sheltered alcove, where the stone curved inward to create a natural room, she built a low, wide platform from the last of the salvaged lumber. On top, she laid their thickest feather mattress and hung a heavy patchwork quilt across the opening to create a curtain. It became Samuel's preferred place to sleep. Curled up with Anchor at his feet, cocooned in the deep quiet and gentle warmth, he said his dreams were better here. Martha found herself spending more and more of her time in the hollow, the light blue fabric of her dress a soft counterpoint to the grey and green of the stone. The making of things, the steady labor, settled her mind. The space was no longer just a discovery, it was becoming part of them. Samuel's collection of pebbles and crystals on the bottom shelf grew daily. Each new addition, a piece of milky quartz, a stone with a perfect white ring, a flat grey skipper, was a marker of another day spent in their sanctuary, a tangible record of their secret life. The growing row of stones was a testament to the quiet wonder that now filled their lives, a wonder that felt earned, built with their own hands. As the iron grip of winter loosened into the muddy promise of March, word of Martha's good fortune began to spread, carried on the slow currents of rural gossip. It started with the Abernathys, their nearest neighbors, a kind, hard-working family who lived 2 miles down the creek. When Martha had brought Mrs. Abernathy a basket filled with fresh, vibrant spinach in the middle of a late frost, the woman had stared at it as if it were magic. "Martha, how?" she had asked, her eyes wide. Trusting the woman's inherent goodness, Martha had made a decision. A wonder this large felt wrong to keep entirely to oneself. A few days later, she led the Abernathy family, husband, wife, and their 2 quiet daughters, through the fissure in the rock. Their reaction was one of pure, unadulterated awe. They stood in the center of the great chamber, their heads tilted back, their mouths agape, their whispers echoing in the vast, warm space. They touched the growing leaves in her garden, drank the cool water from the pool, and looked at Martha with a newfound respect. They promised to keep her secret, but a marvel of that magnitude was a difficult thing to contain. The story changed as it traveled, becoming a garbled tale of a miraculous root cellar, of a widow's strange luck. Most folks were simply pleased for her, another testament to the resilience of a woman they all admired. But the whispers eventually reached the ears of Alastair Sterling, a man whose property bordered hers to the north. Sterling was one of the area's original settlers, a gaunt, stern man who had carved his ranch from the wilderness 30 years prior. He was a man of rigid principles and deep-seated territorialism, who believed he knew every rock, tree, and secret within a day's ride of his home. The idea of a secret he did not know, especially one on his very border, was an affront to his sense of order. The rumor of a hollow mountain was a disruption, a loose thread in the tightly woven map of the world he held in his mind. And so, one afternoon in late May, he rode over to the Cole homestead, his posture stiff and formal in the saddle, to investigate the matter for himself. Anchor announced Sterling's arrival with a low, rumbling growl from the porch, his body tense. Martha stepped out of the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron, her calm expression a mask for the sudden unease she felt. Sterling dismounted, his movements precise and economical. He was not a man given to pleasantries. He nodded curtly, his eye scanning her small, tidy homestead before settling on the granite escarpment behind it. "Mrs. Cole," he began, his voice dry as dust. "I've come about a matter concerning our shared property line." He spoke of the rumors, the whispers of impossible winter greens and a cellar that defied the seasons. He wasn't accusatory, but his questions were pointed, probing. "They say you found something in the mountain." Martha was polite but offered nothing. "My late husband built a fine root cellar. It holds the cold out well." Sterling's gaze was sharp. "The story suggests something more. Something geological." He gestured vaguely toward the rock face. "A man's claim is for the surface of the land he works. The law is quite particular about what lies beneath. Mineral rights, subterranean features. These are often separate matters." He left soon after, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. A week later, a letter arrived, delivered by the circuit mail rider. It was from Sterling. In formal, spidery script, he laid out his position. His original land patent, filed in 1851, granted him his acreage and, he claimed, all subterranean features contiguous with the primary rock strata of Sterling Peak. He contended that her late husband's homestead claim, filed much later in 1878, was for surface rights only. He politely but firmly suggested that the cavern, being a significant subterranean feature of the peak's geology, was therefore an extension of his own property. He was not claiming her cabin or her fields, only the hollow space within the mountain. The space she had made into a home. The letter felt like a stone dropping into the quiet pool of her life. Martha read the letter twice, her initial shock hardening into a cold, quiet anger. This place was not some geological curiosity for a land baron to claim with a bit of ink. It was her larder, her garden, Samuel's sanctuary. It was the security she had painstakingly built with her own two hands, bucket by bucket, stone by stone. She would not let it be taken from her by a legal technicality. She went to the small, sturdy lockbox where she kept their important papers and retrieved her husband's deed and the worn survey map. The language of the deed was simple, as plain as the land it described, 160 acres, bounded by Willow Creek to the south and the granite escarpment to the north. There was no mention of depth, no clauses about what lay above or below. For the next 3 days, she did not enter the cavern. Instead, she worked outside, in the full light of the sun. She found the iron survey markers her husband had driven into the ground at the corners of their property. With a 100-foot measuring chain, a compass, and a ball of twine, she began the laborious process of remeasuring her claim. It was work her husband had taught her, a lesson in precision and patience. Samuel followed her, a silent helper, holding the end of the chain, driving small wooden stakes where she instructed. She worked from the southern creek bank northward, her light blue dress a moving patch of color against the greening landscape. Finally, she measured the distance from her northern boundary line, the line she shared with Sterling, to the fissure in the rock. She measured it 3 times to be certain. The entrance to the cavern was 152 feet south of the property line, well and truly on her land. Her heart settled. The only way in was hers. She sat at her small kitchen table and drew a new map on a fresh sheet of paper, carefully marking the boundary lines, the location of the cabin, and the precise position of the entrance. She noted her measurements in clear, blocky letters. She knew the main chamber of the cavern almost certainly extended northward, passing invisibly under Sterling's property. But access was everything. The door belonged to her. That had to be enough. Mr. Sterling, true to his formal nature, did not resort to threats or intimidation. He petitioned the territorial land office in the county seat, and in early July, an agent was dispatched to arbitrate the dispute. The agent was a man named Davies, a quiet, methodical official with tired eyes and ink stains on his fingers. He arrived on a dust-covered horse, his demeanor one of impartial bureaucracy. He set up in Martha's small cabin, laying his books and papers on her table. He listened first to Mr. Sterling, who had ridden over to present his case. Sterling spoke of historical precedent, of geological contiguity, and the wording of his original 1851 patent, which he believed gave him rights to the mountain itself, not just the surface of it. He was articulate and firm. Then, Mr. Davies turned to Martha. She did not offer a passionate speech or an emotional plea. She simply unrolled the new map she had drawn and laid it next to her husband's deed. She presented her measurements, her voice steady and clear. Mr. Sterling's claim may have merit if one could enter the cavern from his land, sir, she said calmly. But one cannot. The only entrance is here. She tapped the spot on the map. 152 feet inside my property line. Davies studied her map, then Sterling's, his brow furrowed in concentration. I will need to see for myself. Martha led the two men, with Samuel and Anchor trailing behind, to the fissure. Sterling looked at the narrow opening, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had clearly imagined something far grander. Davies examined the entrance, the tool marks on the stone, and the path leading to it. He took out his own measuring chain and, with Sterling watching his every move, confirmed Martha's measurements himself. Back at the cabin, he sat in silence for a long time, consulting a thick, leather-bound book of territorial statutes. Finally, he looked up. The legal principle of ad columit ad infros is not interpreted absolutely in this territory, Mr. Sterling, he stated, his voice flat and final. In cases of enclosed subterranean features, access dictates use. As the sole entrance lies squarely within Mrs. Cole's patented claim, the accessible portion of the cavern is legally hers to improve and inhabit. The inaccessible portion that may lie beneath your property remains a geological feature of no legal consequence. Sterling, a man for whom rules were paramount, absorbed the ruling without expression. He gave a stiff, formal nod. I see. Thank you for your time, Mr. Davies. He did not look at Martha. He simply mounted his horse and rode away, a rigid figure receding into the vast landscape. The dispute was over. The resolution settled over the homestead like a peaceful summer evening. The threat had passed, not with a roar, but with the quiet scratch of a pen and the simple logic of a surveyor's chain. The cavern was hers, legally and morally. That July, the air outside grew heavy and hot, the sun beating down on the dry grass. But inside the hollow mountain, it was always a perfect, cool 68 degrees. Martha's subterranean garden flourished, producing an abundance of greens and, to her surprise, small, sweet carrots. The Abernathys, who had waited anxiously for news, came to visit as soon as they heard the verdict. Mrs. Abernathy brought a jar of her finest strawberry preserves, not as a gift of pity, but as a token of celebration. Their awe at the space was now mingled with a deep admiration for Martha's quiet strength. You earned this place, Martha, Mr. Abernathy said, his voice echoing softly in the great stone room. You didn't just find it. You made it. His words resonated with a truth Martha felt deep in her bones. The cavern was more than a sanctuary now, it was an extension of her home, a testament to her labor. She spent the rest of the summer improving it, building more shelves for canning jars, constructing a proper dry sink with a drainage channel leading back toward the main pool's outflow. It was a larder, a pantry, a storm cellar, and a living space all in one. It was security, tangible and real. A year passed. The seasons turned, each bringing its own challenges and rewards to the world outside. But inside the hollow, time seemed to move differently, marked only by the steady growth of the garden and the slow, patient work of Martha's hands. One warm afternoon, she sat on a smooth stone bench she had built just inside the entrance, the faint light from the fissures striping the floor. Her familiar light blue dress was faded now, but clean and mended. A large ceramic bowl rested in her lap, steadily filling with the bright green peas she was shelling. Samuel was nearby, at his shelf. He was carefully adding a new treasure to his collection, a smooth, flat stone with an iridescent sheen. Anchor was dozing at her feet, his tail thumping a soft, contented rhythm against the cool stone. The making had not been in the moment of discovery. It was in the 1,000 small acts of care that followed, the patient labor, the hauling of soil, the setting of stones. It was the slow, quiet transformation of a found space into a home.